Great. Well, hi everyone. I hope you had a good lunch break. We're back here to discuss an interesting panel around data. The panel title is Next Steps Towards a Smarter Business, but we have broken it up into a few sections within the agenda. But before we get into that, perhaps I'll just invite my fellow panelists to introduce themselves. We'll go from left to right here, so perhaps I'll just pass to Jeff and then we'll go down the line.
Hi, my name's Jeff Soon, based in Singapore. I'm the Managing Director for Snowflake ASEAN.
Thanks, Jeff. Hi, I'm Katrina Briedis. I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager for Asia Pacific at Denodo, and I'm based in Sydney. I'm visiting Singapore at the moment.
Hi, this is Jin Xin. I'm from Alexandra Hospital. I'm the head of data science and analytics.
Well, perhaps to set the scene for all of us, we had a few chats already, quite a number of them, and some common themes that we've been discussing. I think if I were to paint the scene around data democratization, should it be in the cloud? Should it be on-prem? What are the future data sources coming in? How do I join data effectively? And the like of all that, it leads to a lot of the things that all three of our panelists today have been looking at, particularly in the market of clients. So I wanted to sort of frame the reference of that and really delve a bit deeper into some topics, such as structured, unstructured data, and areas like that. So perhaps what I can do is I can start with Katrina to share a little bit around what Denodo does. I think the main thing is around data virtualization, but perhaps you can share a bit about what you see, and in the context of structured, unstructured data, how does that all work?
Sure, and I might have covered this already in the presentation earlier a little bit, touched on this, but I think there's all sorts of data out there at the end of the day, and there's going to be new types of data coming, new formats and things as well. So there's always new data to be handled. At Denodo, we have connectors to all sorts of data. So we make data accessible and visible to the business, and then more consumable at the end of the day. So what that means is, as I talked about earlier, we live in, our organisations have very complex data ecosystems, and it's not scalable to have a single destination for all of your data. All of your data I'm talking about. In some cases you'll get partial amounts of data, but not all of your data. And at Denodo we approach it a little bit differently in that we try and leave as much data where it lives, and access it that way rather than moving it around. When it comes to structured and unstructured data, we work with structured data easily, right? We've all been doing that for a long time. Unstructured data can pose some challenges, but I think at the end of the day, where we focus at Denodo is looking at not the content of that unstructured data, but the metadata of that unstructured data, so that we can understand what that piece of information contains. We don't necessarily need to know the content itself. So there's different approaches you can take to handle the different types of data, and Denodo data virtualization is one approach of providing a data delivery layer across your data ecosystem, regardless of what technologies and solutions you're using.
So really what you're saying is leave the data where it is and bring in data as and when you need it and process it to produce some kind of outcome or output.
Exactly, so deliver result sets, not...
And in unstructured and structured data, is there a reason why this virtualization of data plays to that strength of it? For example, if there's a lot of unstructured data, are there any examples you've seen in the market that would relate to the audience or make them feel like this is why I'm going to use it this way, as opposed to pulling it into one location?
Yeah, there's many examples, I think, particularly in health, and I think we'll get to that later, where there's just pockets of data everywhere, and in order to get a single view of a patient or get clinical type analysis happening with disparate data sets everywhere is challenging, and then they're not just structured data sets, they're unstructured. So it's about accelerating that process of integrating data, and regardless of the type of data. In Denodo, what we do is we work within a two-dimensional world. We don't join a multi-dimensional cube with a table structure from whatever database. It's a different approach. So
sounds good. I'm going to go to Jeff first, and Jinian, I'm going to ask your point of view on this in a second. So we have someone saying, leave all the data where it is and bring it in, do something with it, act on it. From your point of view, Jeff, Snowflake is slightly different. You're enabling pulling everything more of a central way. What's your response to the point of view of leaving it all where it is versus perhaps what Snowflake does is enabling it to be more central in some way?
Yeah, look, I think at Snowflake, we're really fortunate in that we get to work with a really wide spectrum of customers. So in Singapore, we have everything from SMB customers to government customers to lots of digital natives, as well as your traditional enterprise. And when you look at it, for our entire, I guess, startup segment, for anyone who's born in the cloud, often from day one, they're going to architect a platform because there's no legacy, where it's all based on the centralization of analytic data so that you can drive the most value from it. Because the last thing you want is there's so many personas in today's data environment. You've got your traditional report people, you've got your analysts, you've got your machine and data scientists, and you have applications that you need to feed both upstream and downstream, right? So by having all the data centralized, it makes it quite easy to serve all these different personas. But once again, not everyone can start from a greenfield environment. So I think that's where really our partnership with Denodo comes in place, in that with some enterprises, you look, 80% of the data may be pretty easy to centralize because that data may be either in a SaaS provider, like I may be using Salesforce, I may be using Workday, I may be using all these cloud applications. It's very, very easy to centralize these SaaS applications and the data in Snowflake in the cloud. But the reality is I may have a traditional order management system. I may have a traditional core banking system. That's where I think it really comes into play. The difficulty, it's just a challenge. Is it easier to virtualize the data, or is it easier to rebuild the pipeline? And I would say for the majority of enterprise customers, they're virtualizing the data as compared to rebuilding pipelines from scratch.
And I would assume that for many of you who've done big ERP or big system shifts, the last thing you want to be doing is redoing that all again into one legacy landscape. But in the world of data, perhaps there is part of it that would sit on a common platform, and then some of that will remain. But then how do I bring in those data sources would be key. Jinian, I'd like to hear from your point of view, just listening to this conversation from a health perspective, because we know health is one of the most challenging areas when it comes to privacy and data. What's your point of view with respect to data virtualization versus on-prem cloud? How are you seeing it within your current landscape in the hospital networks that you support?
Right. So when I joined healthcare like 13 years ago, we still have a huge medical record office, which is like a warehouse to store all the medical notes, which is written by doctors. And there's a whole team of porters moving the notes in and out. Nowadays, the CEO asking, do you still need space for the next year? Shall we cut by half, or shall we even remove it? We don't see medical records anymore, right? But where the records goes, it goes to the digital, right? But this really takes time, and for a doctor to change, really it's not so easy. For the for the virtualization of the data, I think that's a brilliant idea. For the hospital legacy, right? There's so many legacy systems. Well, I worked in NUHS in the past. There's average 170 systems. With the new medical record system, they reduce by half, but still have another half. And so many systems, there's so many data sources out there. When people need to use some of the data, it becomes very, very hard, right? And this data visualization, it sounds like a fantastic idea. And now we are building a C3 system. That means it's command control center. So this kind of command control center, we need real-time data. And we need data from different sources, which the virtualization can be a very brilliant idea to bring all the information together. Yeah, so that's I think it's an excellent use case in the near future for healthcare.
So on that point of 170 systems, You know, I think maybe some time or some years ago, everyone said, let's put all those systems onto the cloud, right? And what I'm hearing is that perhaps it's best to leave half of it where it is, move half of it perhaps and transform that data into some kind of cloud-based framework, and then connect the data sources as and when. How do you look at the relevant data sources? Like, how do you go through that process of identifying which systems should I move? Is it all of them, half of them? What data is important in that? What are the steps that you've been looking at and trying to move through that process?
Yeah, so we advanced to the second topic about how to identify the relevant data, right? So let me just share an example. So when my doctor asked me to measure some medication efficacy, means the medication I prescribe, whether it's effective on a patient, right? So the first thing we do is, okay, so we find out the doctor prescribed medication, what's the medication, patient outcome, or the lab results, to correlation, see whether it's okay. But after a while, the doctor come back, hey, no, my patient don't take the medication after they collect the prescription. Probably they collect half, or probably they don't even collect. Oh, okay. So then next step, we're going to find the data from the system. We need to find the medication dispensed. It's not medication prescribed. Then this will be one step closer. That means it's exactly the medication we give to the patient. So we measure this as second. So this is better proxy than the first time, right? But still that people argue, hey, if my patient, elderly, confused, going back, medication forgot somewhere, forgot to eat, right? Whether the medication adherence is there. So how can you measure from the dispense to the outcome? Wow, that's another challenge, right? But the last step is hard because we need a lot of follow-up from the community care to get the accurate data from the patient exactly whether they're taking the medication. But we can use the medication dispensed as a surrogate, as the better proxy to measure the outcome. So in terms of whether which one is more relevant, the medication dispense will be more relevant, and really depend on the use case, depend on the objective of the clinical study, the operational research, right? So which data can be better measure the outcome. So this one really is not a data person alone. We need to engage the stakeholder. We need to engage the doctors, clinical inputs to find out which one is the best data to be applied, to be used for the analysis.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing there is, in order to figure out which data I need to use, I look at the process flow that brings the value to, in this case, patients or doctors or efficiency gains that you may be rolling, and then perhaps looking at which data do I need to enable that, and how do I drive that in a more real-time way, improving the systems, right? From your point of view, Katrina, I mean, what are you seeing in other sectors or health sectors? Are you seeing similar things? Do you have any examples of how people are figuring out what data to select in their whole process of virtualization?
Yeah, I think with some of the customers I've worked with, they will, they're typically joint customers with Snowflake. So it's a decision on whether we need to persist the data or not. Is there a need to keep the data, or can we reproduce it from the source? Is there a need to store it at the end of the day, I think is the question that most of our customers look at. Because most of the time, as we've talked about, but Snowflake is complementary, or Denodo is complementary to Snowflake, and Snowflake's complementary to Denodo. So it's a bit of best of both worlds, basically, looking at it that way, but determining on a case-by-case basis.
Is that meaning that you're not creating piles and piles of data for the sake of it? You're just using the data as that instance requires, and then making the outcome to the need that your teams are looking at?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. It's like looking at, do we need to replicate the data yet again, and the associated costs of maintaining those data pipelines or ETL processes, as well as looking at whether, mainly, I mean, looking at where you can accelerate delivery, deliver more in real time. So it could be a scenario of, Snowflake having the majority of the data, but to get the the last bit, the real time, the most current fresh data.
Act on something, yeah.
To act on something, we need to go to Snowflake to get the history potentially, but then go to the operational system or the source, one of the other sources to get the most up-to-date data and combine that together.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for the audience, we're seeing a lot of next best action responses. I mean, we're all used to now using apps. We're getting promotions or activities based on, you know, the grab ride that we're making or the online shopping order that we're making, and these things that drive real-time type of insights. So it's quite interesting to see how the technology and capability enables these type of features that impact the B2B and the B2C landscape. Jeff, before we were chatting and you were talking about these interesting statistics and numbers around what's happening across the network and what you're seeing from the uptake. I mean, are you able to share a bit of insight as to the volume of what you're seeing and the magnitude of trajectory since COVID in the last few years has come upon Snowflake?
Yeah, look, our results are pretty public, and you know, we've been very lucky to enjoy enormous growth over the last couple of years. I think across every domain, no matter what type of company you are, you've been forced to digitize by the last 2 years. Like, take your typical hawker center in Singapore. 2 years ago, I'm running a cash business because everyone knows you don't need to do GST if you turn over less than $1 million. So I'm happy, I'm cooking wonton noodles, COVID comes along, suddenly I need a merchant account because I now need to be able to take online payments. Suddenly I need to do a partnership with a delivery organization, be it Grab, Deliveroo, or other organizations. Suddenly I'm going to start to advertise my business, right? So I'm going to start to spend some money on Google AdWords. So what has happened is overnight, I've been forced to digitize. Overnight, I've got dozens of data sources I didn't have before. And thankfully, with cloud technology, for a relatively small amount of money, I can get up and running. And imagine the impact on even government, some of the most traditional, no, I wouldn't say that. Singapore is one of the most advanced, Singapore government's one of the most advanced adopters of digital technology. The ability to service an entire population of 5 million people digitally, because it just, you know, we can't keep our counters open during COVID. So we've seen a massive increase in data in that domain as well. And finally, for traditional enterprises, they've seen the fact that everyone is moved to taking, you know, collecting their food from Grab delivery or other providers. So if I'm an NTUC, finally I need to get my FairPrice app up and running. You know, that's a significant part of the business now, doing these online deliveries. So we've seen a massive acceleration in the adoption of technology. To be honest, almost all of this has been cloud native. These aren't organizations that wake up one day, go, we need to go digital, let's build a new data center. That doesn't exist in COVID. Like, Singapore has been a very fortunate country that the government managed COVID so well. In other countries, you just didn't have the ability to take shipments of new infrastructure, to go build out, do new build-outs of data centers, rack and stack the equipment, manage it, right? So I think just the fact that all three hyperscalers now have thousands of people in the region employed, and 10 years ago had hundreds, is just this massive shift towards applications and data in the cloud.
I think many of you, I'm sure, having that similar challenges with sort of how do I accelerate my digital transformation to keep up with digital natives. What's your point of view? Like, do you think they can catch up? Like, what are the things that non-digital natives or more traditional multinationals need to be doing differently from what you're seeing? Because you're seeing both sides of the coin. What do you think they need to be doing differently?
Oh, look, I think that the great thing about traditional enterprises is they've got a wealth of knowledge about the customer. They have great brand names. They have really robust existing processes, right? So a lot of this is quite ripe to digitize quite quickly. They've got the trust of the consumer. On the other hand, we really see these organizations spring up that can go after specific segments of what a traditional, let's say a traditional bank. We've seen startups not try to be an end-to-end bank, but we'll go after FX payments, we'll go after overseas remittance, we'll go after e-wallets, right? So I think there is no choice but for traditional enterprises to really double-click and accelerate their transformation, because it's funny, you read about digital natives, and I'm not going to mention names, but there's a very popular ride-hailing company that's rumored to be buying a stake in a traditional bank in Malaysia. So imagine all that fantastic, innovative technology being applied to a more traditional bank in another country. There's really this amazing opportunity for synergy.
I totally agree. I think one of the things we've seen a lot more is the convergence of sectors. So, you know, one, you're not sitting, when you get interactions now from companies, they could be in multiple areas, from banking, payments, technology, telecom, retail, whatever it may be. And in that world, you're not joining data within your silo, you're joining data outside to other sectors and industries. And I think that is a very compelling conversation to figure out your data strategy in a high velocity data world to monetize opportunities. I think that's quite important. We've got a couple of questions that I'd like to maybe go through here. So one of the questions is, what is the most challenging, well, thank you also for those online who are throwing questions in, so please keep them coming. But what is the most challenging thing we should take note of when coming up with a metric for smart business? Any takers on the panel to answer that question?
Okay, I'll give it a shot. So look, I mean, we've lived through a very interesting last 2 years, right? Where companies have achieved insane valuation on very, very interesting metrics. We've seen Elon Musk question his takeover on Twitter based on the number of actual real users versus, you know, the fake bots, right? So I think when you look about it at a smart business, the fundamentals haven't changed. If you can't generate positive cash flow, you're going to go bankrupt. If your top line isn't significantly higher than your bottom line, you're going to go bankrupt, right? So really, when we look at these metrics, it's really understanding what we're trying to drive, the trade-offs, but also, you know, we don't live in a world of infinite funding, you know, series A, B, C, D, E, F, G. We need to have sustainable business models. So that's what I would probably say would be a metric. I would also look at ways of really, and I think people were talking about this before, how can I really define non-financial metrics about the way that we interact with our customer base? How can I actually start to look at the customer's trust, you know, potentially NPS scores, that type of thing. But I think that's also a key component of defining the business. It's not just the financial metrics, but it's the customer engagement.
You know, I mean, that's an important point, I think, because I'm not sure how you all feel, but there is probably we're more fickle on trying new things, actually, and you can lose your trust very quickly with an interaction or two that is not so, you know, it doesn't meet your expectation. So, you know, we're now looking at lifetime value of a customer that says, well, if I can sell a new product or service, how can I continue that journey and expand? But if I have missteps, perhaps that, you know, or you've got new competitors coming in, that starts to really shift the metrics of your value of what you're trying to do there. So I think they're really good points there, Jeff. A couple of other questions here. What could be a good strategy to break down the barriers between data silos and shared data within an organization wary due to data sensitivity? So how do we break down the barriers to share data within an organization between silos and given the data sensitivity? This is an interesting one. I've got some interesting points around here too, but any takers? That would be a good one for you, Jinyin, in terms of health sector.
I think the data privacy issue is always a challenge, especially in healthcare. Just now, I have discussed with my fellow panelists that we're telling the story about the last time in Google and Facebook. In the early days, they are competing head-to-head on social networking. They come with the Google Bars, which has a lot of advanced features, mobile first, and gain a lot of users. But because of a lot of complaints on the privacy, governance, so Google is very cautious. So they take down the program after 1 year. But Facebook is so much brave. Then they just go ahead and people love it, and I just launch it. And I get the fine, I just pay the fine, and then I move ahead. So now Facebook will become the most famous social networking platform. Okay, so this is just an example. So come back to our healthcare, which is a very regulated, very risk-averse industry. It depends on the objective. The DNA is basically risk-averse, but if the objective is data first, we have to embrace the the information age. We need to enhance the patient experience. We have enhanced our clinical care. We have to really adjust and relook at our strategies to make it more openly shared, of course, with the right governance. So the governance strategy must be be more granular, make sure the right people have the right access to the data, instead of just easily cut through or everything. Yeah, so the data sharing is very, very important. And we cannot just give away the privacy, but privacy is important as well, right? So that must strike a very nice, fine balance, and we need to get buy-in from the regulators, from auditors as well. Yeah, and our IT fellows, because they are so concerned about the IT, the data leak, security things. Right? So there's a lot of stakeholder management, and there's a top management buy-in as well.
Katrina, you want to add to that?
Sure. I think it's a great scenario for data virtualization, actually. By not moving the data or actually providing the data, we can actually provide an abstraction of that data and mask it and hide the information that we're delivering to different, across different organisations that way, I think.
Yeah, go, Jeff.
Yeah, no, I come from...
Something to add too. So.
Yeah, no, I'll go first. So I come from previously I used to work for a company called Cisco, and we had the concept of, whitelisting versus blacklisting. I think when I see a lot of companies doing data strategies today, they spend so much time working out what data you should have access to. So they'll map out all 50 personas, they'll have very, very defined rules on you can see this, can see this. That's not going to work, it's not scalable. Focus on what data people shouldn't see. Create your policies around what you can't see and give them access to everything else. And I guarantee you that's the strategy of 99% of digital natives out there. They focus and they're very protective of what you can't have, but they're not overly granular about what you should have access to.
It's a really good topic, and I want to put my 2 cents too, because I think it's a really interesting one. So I agree with everything that's been said, and some of the things that we're also hearing is doing the processing and pushing the outcome. So rather than pulling the data in and using the data, you process the data and push the outcome out into the cloud or the public domain. And the other thing was sometimes what we're seeing is they cluster groups of information. So for example, if the confidential information is single female 25 to 30 years old type of thing, right? And that individual can be identified as an individual, and that's confidential, let's say. But if you have 10,000 of the same profile and you cluster them and say, this is a persona, and I want to act on that persona of 100,000 of those profiles, you're no longer looking at confidential information in that group. You're acting on a cluster of activity, or a cluster of a profile to act on activity. So to answer that question to the person, a great question. Obviously, there's a lot of conversation around this. There's a mix of what everyone has just said here, but I guess there's various contexts that I think we'd need to discuss and look at in your specific situation, which I think can definitely be addressed. I like this one here. Can we get your expert opinion on whether to migrate or start fresh?
I'll tackle this one, I think. I'm going to talk from a data perspective, obviously, and I think from my background, having delivered a lot of data projects, the disappointing thing is knowing that only a small amount of that data is being used. So why migrate everything when you don't know whether it's being used or not? So we quite often suggest to our customers, why not introduce data virtualization to your existing system, and then you can understand some of the usage and then migrate it that way. That's one approach.
Totally makes sense.
Yeah.
So gone are the days where we're pushing everything to a massive data lake, and then the IT goes, now go use it, and the business kind of doesn't know how to use all that data. Focus on, kind of what Jin was saying, is like focus on the exact use case and then map it reverse and say, well, now I get traction on that. Do I need to move that data into the cloud, or would it be more effective if I either use data virtualization technology or cloud central sort of technologies to get over that hurdle? And there's a scaling conversation, I guess.
I mean, it could be a combination of both, really. Some migrate, some new.
Yep.
At the end of the day.
All right. We've got so many questions, so it's great. And I'm more than happy to just continue this because I think this is sort of responding to the audience. So thank you for the questions. What is a sample of real, so this is for Jinian in terms of Alexandra Hospital. What is a sample of real data result from Alexandra Hospital that is useful for the business?
Okay, so Alexandra Hospital is a public hospital. So we may measure the outcome by efficiency in operation, the outcome of the clinical treatment, right? So let me just give an example. In Alexandra Hospital, the treatment model is different. So for normal hospital, the acute patient goes into the inpatient, stay a few days, stabilize. Okay, if you're okay, you discharge home. If you're not so good, you still need some rehab services. Probably you are decant, you are transferred into the community hospital to follow up with the rehab services, which take probably another 4 weeks or so, right? But in Alexandra Hospital, we try to model something different. So we want to let the patient stay in the same place, right? And if the patient requires rehab services, we don't push patient out to the community hospital. We let the patient stay in the same bed, but the level of services changes. So if the patient change from acute to subacute, the consultant no longer see the patient once a day, probably once a week only. Then there's be more physiotherapists to visit the patient, to help to rehabilitate the patient, right? So the patient don't need to move anywhere. The service will wrap around the patient, right? So this new model sounds fantastic, but we need to have some hard data to value, to measure whether the new model is working well for us, right? So we have to label the patient. We start to label the patient from the L3, which is the most acute, when the patient admit. Once patient become subacute, the patient acuity will change to L1. Okay, then all the services is tagging along with the data, right, in the database. So then we will start to evaluate the results. We see the length of stay. We see the patient readmission rate after the patient discharge, right? So the outcome tells us that the patient, if stay with us, compared to patient going out to community hospital to that start with another journey, the average length of stay reduced by at least 2 weeks. Yeah, so that means the patient stay in the same place, same treatment continue, but we vary the level of care. The patient stay less, and patient pay less, hospital save more costs.
So freeing up bed space effectively is the outcome that you're looking at, but also customer experience or patient experience goes up.
Right, the patient experience is better, the cost is lower.
I'll tell you what would be good if you're lying there and they can tell you what you want to eat, like I want a chicken rice versus a nasi lemak or something. So that would be the full sort of extreme view of knowing what the customer really wants. But that was a great example. We do have another question, but before I jump into that, I wanted to just talk on one of the bullet points that were here around detecting contextual changes and refining data models continuously. Like what does that mean? What is, maybe if I can ask one of you, like, could you explain what do you think is contextual changes and what does that mean to sort of the audience here?
I'm taking this one. Okay. It comes back to data usage at the end of the day, I think, and understanding the usage patterns of data and then understanding how to service the business better when it comes to data results. So that continual process of understanding and improving how data is delivered is important, but you need the right information to be able to understand how to do that. So I know at Denodo we have what's called summary recommendations. So we monitor the usage, who's accessing what data when, so that we can determine if there's too many people hitting an operational system or a source system, then we can suggest to offload certain sets of data into a cache, for an example. It might even be Snowflake for that matter, and then leverage that cache rather than having those 20 users hitting the operational source. So I think taking those types of approaches can help as well.
Yeah, I guess it's right place, right time, and the application of that. Do you see, just a more broad question, we've talked all about data, using it, and all those areas. Like, what's your point of view around the capabilities that are required? Like, do you see that we've got the rights, the capabilities to execute on all of these things? What would be some of your hot tips? You smiled there, Jeff, so maybe I think you've got something to say here, but be curious just to hear from each of you around capabilities, how to make sure we've got the right set of people.
Yeah, contextual changes. I think human beings are very good in contextual, right? Context. So we see the document, we know, oh, this is come from where. We talk to a person, oh, this guy is from Australia. So we are very good in context. But the machine is usually not so good. Okay, in clinical, in the healthcare settings, for example, we want to analyze NLP, certain clinical documentation. Different doctor, they write in different style, right? So sometimes can be very difficult for the NLP to really extract key information from that, right? So this one need a lot of research and manipulations. I think there's a lot of developments in the contextual changes detection and contextual awareness. I think it's still in development, but I am pretty sure in the very soon, in the near future, there's more capabilities that are coming to our application, into our algorithm to build into our production. I will see that this thing will happen very soon.
That's quite interesting, and I think the capability side is something that we continue to, and reflecting on the business, making sure that it all aligns. Okay, so we've got, first of all, the question at the top is to Denodo and Snowflake. What traits, cultural, operating model, and talent, which is kind of linked to sort of what we said here, do you see in your successful clients? So what traits, cultural, operating model, and talent do you see in your successful clients? Start with you, Jeff.
Sure. I think every single one of our successful customers has a very strong champion, and this strong champion needs a combination of technical understanding, otherwise you really wouldn't work out what we could do, but they also need a very strong alignment with the business. And more, our champions are not necessarily your traditional CIO, CTO, but actually someone from a line of business looking to drive innovation. So if you don't have business alignment, it's a science project, and we're not that keen to do science projects, right? So that's the number one thing. The number two thing, I can cheat on this question because I actually had one of our big customers on stage and they were asked this exact same question. What this organization advised was, during the initial formative stages of any data initiative, it makes more sense to have a COE, so you can actually get stuff done. You can actually get the platform governed, secure, deployed, and then after they had that, they started to disband in the COE and start to move a lot of that analytical capability back into the lines of business. So that's what I guess Singapore's largest sovereign wealth fund is doing with their approach to deploying their data strategy, starting off with the COE and then moving to LOBs.
Good one. Katrina,
yeah, I agree actually. I think those are really two important points there, or traits to make a project successful. I think the other areas really are around making sure, and this goes back to an old data warehousing type technique that we used to use around, delivering value so that you can then go to the next project. So with, even if it means de-scoping, I used to do that quite a bit, and deliver something. You always run into problems when you're on data delivery projects, and you've got to deal with them, but you still got to deliver. You don't say we can't deliver. You deliver something, you deliver business value, and then that enables you to go on to the next project. And I think it's like you said, aligning with the business as much as possible, and having those sponsors and champions.
Totally. I think that convergence between business and tech is coming out very clear as well in today's sessions as well. Absolutely crystal clear. We had a question on data monetization, but I think we're probably running a bit out of time here. But perhaps I would ask each of you to leave with one comment or one takeaway from each of you. We didn't plan for this, so I'd be just interested to hear your thoughts on this. So maybe we'll start from you, Jeff, and go down the line of what's your one message to the audience?
Look, I think the one message is it's definitely possible to monetize data, but you need to define clearly what monetization means and embark on a strategy that's consistent with your organization.
From that perspective,
That's a general message as well.
Okay. I think there's always an alternative approach. I think, same old, doing it the same old way probably works, but maybe take a look at streamlining some of those processes as well and doing it differently.
Yeah, so okay, my message from healthcare probably is to be more general, is to make sure our data and our analytics strategy have to be in line with the corporate DNA, right? So then it's better, it's easier to get support and get buy-in from the top, and also we have more people to join the band, right, and to play the ball.
Well, there you have it. That ends our session. Big thank you to Jeff, Katrina, Jin Yin. Big round of applause, everyone. Thank you for your time.